whole fucking diseased, corrupt temple down on your head. It's gotta be biblical.
Hello everyone, welcome to Patriots Across The Pond with Stu and Elisa, a little bit of Thursday Thunder. This is episode 35 of our Thursday show, and we've got another amazing guest, Dr. Lee MERRITT, otherwise known as the Medical Rebel. I'd just like to read a little bit of intro of your bio. Dr. Lee MERRITT began her medical career at the age of 4, carrying her father's black bag on house calls along the back roads of Iowa. In 1980, she graduated from the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry in New York, where she was elected to life membership in the Alpha Omega Alpha Honor Medical Society. Dr. MERRITT completed an orthopedic surgery residency in the United States Navy and served over 10 years as a Navy physician and surgeon. In 1989, she was the only woman to be appointed as the Louis A. Goldstein Fellow of Spinal Surgery at the University of Rochester Strong Memorial Hospital. Dr. MERRITT has been in the private practice of orthopedic and spinal surgery from 1992 to 2021, has served on the board of the Arizona Medical Association and is past president of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. Dr. Lee, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. My apologies. I have talked to my gardener 200 times. Please don't come at 10:30 a.m. And every week I get a broken English text from him saying, "So sorry, we have to come early." So I'll be muted a lot so we don't hear the word.
Well, I have a wall under construction and I don't know when they're coming, so I might be in the same boat.
We're so happy to have you. Now, where are you based now? Are you based in Iowa now?
Right. Well, I'm not in practice anymore. I was in Arizona for over 20 years. And the joke is that nobody retires back to Iowa from Arizona. Everybody retires from the cold country to the warm country. Right. But I did it in reverse. So, yeah, I'm in the Midwest.
Okay. Well, welcome.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things we always like to know from our guests, obviously, a lot of people know you and follow you, but they don't always know like the backstory. So we love to find out how you awakened, when you awakened, and what that journey was like that led you to a lot of the nuttiness we'll talk about, but then of course to today.
Well, I was lucky. My dad and my mom, she was a nurse and helped him in his office. And I grew up in Iowa where he was practicing old time country medicine. And that time it wasn't old time. That's the way it was. No government involved, cash pay. It cost in 1970, he charged $3 for an office visit and $6 for a house call. So it was, that's how you kept prices down. You looked patients in the eye and you got paid in cash. So I knew how that system worked. And then I watched as government came and took over, the prices skyrocketed, the waste, fraud, and abuse became a true thing. But what I missed in all that, so I was awakened to I never wanted government health care in my, I was awakened to that problem. And I knew one of the reasons that I moved back home to the Midwest was when Obamacare was coming in. I just looked at my husband and said, there is nothing good that's going to come of this. this is going to destroy the ability to practice the way I am down here. We had 7 orthopedic surgeons doing the work of about 14 that were in other places. But we were able to do it because we were independent. We were very efficient, and it was getting to the point though it couldn't be done. And that just was going to push us over the brink. Electronic medical records were put in there to not only to gather everybody's data, it's basically a data gathering thing, but also to make it so that we couldn't survive on our own. You couldn't be out, you had to work for the hospital. You had to sell your practice out to the hospital. All these young guys now, because of the debt from medical school, and they go in and if you tried to practice in the system, you couldn't do it. It would be just cumbersome. My son was going to medical school about that time, and I asked him, he was complaining about how he didn't like third year medical clinic. And I said, oh, that's your exciting year where you learn all this new stuff. And he said, well, all I do is stand around and watch my preceptor work on the computer. And I said, oh, that's very interesting. Let me ask her something for me. Ask her how effective or efficient she is now compared to before that, and when she was not having the electronic medical records to deal with. And he came back and he said about 50%. And I said, yeah, that was about when I tried to do it at other hospitals where I did some locum tenens, that was about my experience too. That you could if you could see 30 patients competently in a day with the old paper charts, you went down to 15 under Obamacare. So consequently, you ended up working for hospitals. People did. Even me. When I retired back, I came back and I just did locum tenens, worked for other hospitals, kind of thing. Well, so I didn't have to wake up to all that, and I already knew about some of the scams of vaccines. I had looked into 2014. In the old days, we had what's called a physician's desk reference. And they don't publish it anymore, which makes it very easy to skew data and change data as time goes on. But there was a big book, and you could have it on your desk, and it literally told you the FDA studies and what they found about any drug and all the side effects and everything that were in it. So when 2014 came out, and I didn't pick this up soon enough to save my children from all this, unfortunately, but they were much older, so they didn't get very many vaccines. But in 2014, the nurses came to me, and they said, what do you think about mandating this flu shot? And I said, well, first of all, I mean, I'm not an expert in vaccines, but I don't take it, and I don't know any surgeons that take it. And by the way, but I will look into it. I'll look into it. But I said, no matter what, it's immoral and unethical, medically unethical to mandate anybody to force anybody to take any kind of medical treatment. That just defies the principles of your body autonomy, right? But when I looked into it, I discovered that it turned out I looked particularly at our data, because they showed how if you plugged in the data from year to year, from your state, you would then know how effective this thing was. And I said, this is a complete scam, using their own, FDA data and my state numbers, that the best it could ever be is 10% beneficial. And that's not enough to be called a vaccine even. So this is all fraud. So I said, and I wrote an article that then got published in a journal, and and every year I would just quietly give this to the CEO of my hospital and just let them know that I'm protesting your mandate and I'm not taking it. You can do with that what you want. If you don't want me here, I'll leave. But that's what I did prior to all this. The other advantage I think that I had in figuring out COVID a little bit was that I had been on the Navy Research Advisory Committee. It's a subcommittee of Congress. And when I was in orthopedic practice before Arizona, I was in Washington, D.C. And I was given a congressional appointment to this subcommittee. And we looked at future technology for the Navy services and some naval services. Sometimes we would literally meet in locked vaults. I mean, this was like the CIA deputy director ran this, and it was to look at kind of some very high secret technology and things and decide where to go. But they had to have a doctor on this for reasons that, it sounds good. I'm sure Congress determined that they should do that, but they never paid attention. They never once, in the 4 years I was on that committee, never once ever thought about the fact that medicine could be a weapon of war, but I did. And so I kind of on my own just studied bioweapons and chemical weapons. And, we got an opportunity to go around and talk to people. So when COVID broke out, I called somebody that was in that sphere and I said, should I watch this one? Because always before, when MERS and SARS broke out in the early 2000s, he said, nah, don't worry about this one. But this time he said, no, you should watch it. So I started watching it from about the middle of December of 2019. And by late January 2020, the other thing is I don't speak Russian, but I can read enough Russian that I can sort through the literature. And I said, I'm being lied to. This is January of 2020. We are being lied to. What really is going on here? And I found some Russian guys I thought were in the bioweapons community, and I read their news reports first, and then what they had written on the side. And it's very interesting. They said, we don't think this is a natural disease, and we don't think the Chinese created it. Oh, that was a big eye opener. I said, that's very interesting. And, when I was studying Russian in college in the 60s, we thought, poor Russians, the poor Soviets, it was the Soviets back then, the poor Soviets are not getting any truth. If it weren't for Golos Ameriki, the voice of America going to them, thank God we're giving them the truth. And then now in 2020, I'm realizing we are being lied to by our media everywhere. The only truth is coming out of Russia that I can find. And even some in China. Actually, even China, I found some information. So that's how I kind of got into this. And then it's just been one rabbit hole after another since then. Things I would never have expected to discover.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I just made some notes as we were talking, because I remember back in the 60s and early 70s as a little girl, I remember the doctor coming to the house. And, my mother would like straighten, and she makes sure there was a clean towel in the bathroom and all this kind of stuff. And then that slowly stopped. But the most prominent memory I have is taking my kids to the pediatrician. And I brought my kids to a pediatrician who was the daughter of my pediatrician when I was a little girl. So it was a family practice, so to speak. And it was wonderful. I mean, we talked about, she was of Italian descent like I am. We talk about pasta and this and what are you feeding the kids? And it was so personal. And then she sold to the big conglomerate here, hospital. And I went for my first visit with the kids. And I didn't know if I should cry, shoot someone, or like just run out, because it was, this is a woman, okay, at the time, who's probably 60 or so, by this point. And she's got this big screen and she's like, all right, sweetie, to my daughter, just have to ask you some questions. And she's like looking on now, what kind of activity are you doing? And I'm looking at this going, are you free? She goes, I'm sorry, I got to do this. They want me to do this.
I got to ask these questions. Yeah.
And I'm like, this is so retarded. I mean, what are they doing? And then the whole energy of the waiting room, of the front desk, I was so turned off. That's the only word I could use. And thank God my kids were a little older. They were teenagers, so there wasn't going to be much more of having to go to the doctor kind of thing. But, and then the first argument I had with her was when my daughter needed vaccines. Now, I unfortunately didn't know enough at the time, but I had a sense. My sense was, if you're giving an MMR, why does this kid have to get 3 things in one? That was like my thing. And I said, can you break it up? And she's like, yeah, I mean, I guess we could. I mean, really? And I was like, yeah. And I did that. I don't know if it really helped. My kids have anxiety and all, I don't know. But later on, I found out they wouldn't even do that anymore. Like they wouldn't even, and I'd come in, she'd go, oh, you're such a pain in the ass. I got to do this. I got to do that. But it's so amazing how you look back and you're like, oh my God, if I only knew.
Well, and so I'm actually running a conference in August called Escaping the Medical Matrix. I have that's the name of my book coming out in August.
Oh, okay.
And what I've learned, and this is what I've learned recently that's just really hit me to the core. People talk about this being a spiritual journey, a spiritual fight that we're in. And you can say those words, but until you really have it here, you don't. I mean, it really hit here when I discovered this, that we as physicians don't come from an ancient history of healing. We come from an ancient history of poisoning. That's really the truth. When we graduate from medical school, and this is, I'm not saying this is what caused, this system is not created, what you're describing is not created to be making you better. It's creating to control the narrative and to get your information so they can control it better tomorrow. I mean, that's and who knows what else they're getting out of this, but those are the two simplest things they can get. But when I was in medical school, when you graduate medicine, you get your diploma. You could walk out right then, but we don't, because we think, it's traditional. You stand up and you take the Hippocratic Oath. Now, the Hippocratic Oath by itself, if you read just what it tells you how to be a physician, it's pretty good. I mean, the first, when I was in Rochester, they took the traditional oath, which was translated by a Scotch surgeon. At least this is the story. I can't prove it because I don't read ancient Greek, but he was a Greek scholar from Cambridge or something and a surgeon, and he translated this 10th century apparently manuscript. That's the oldest one we have is in the Vatican, and we can't read it, and they don't give you a translation, so who knows what it really says. But this is at the end of your graduation, you stand up and then you have it in your program in unison. Now, this is for medical doctors, not necessarily DOs and naturopaths or anybody else, but you stand up and in unison, dare I say a chant, you take an oath. And we all thought it says an oath, but we know it's not really an oath. Yes, it's really an oath. In fact, the Scottish physician, when he translated it, his last lines of this, that at the end of the whole thing, it says, I accept this indenture. An indenture is a bond. You are bonded. It's like being an indentured servant. You have to work to this system. Okay. So this is the first line of the Hippocratic Oath, all said in unison. I swear by Apollo the physician and Asclepius and Panacea Hygeia with all the gods and goddesses as my witness. Now, Apollo the physician these are ancient pagan gods. Okay. We all thought it was just kind of cutesy nonsense, but Apollo was never a healer. When you read anything about Apollo in classic literature and Homer's Odyssey, the Iliad, the Trojan War, what does he do? He's a poisoner and a plague bringer. When people went to the temples of Apollo, which were in ancient Phrygia and in an area that was known as the seat of Satan, by the way, in the book of Revelation, you would go to these temples and basically you would bribe Apollo not to poison you. That's what you were doing. I thought, well, that's a good metaphor for medicine today. You go and you pay them and you hope they don't poison you along the way. So that's really where we came from. When I recognized this, I literally sat at my desk and said and asked for atonement and repentance, because I'm going to tell you, this is an evil cult, and it comes out of an ancient pagan cult of Cybele, this ancient religion. And we just all thought it was nonsense, that it was just kind of a cute historical little thing that you did. No, it's really not. And if you don't believe it, this is the big thing. If you don't believe this, if you think this is all just crazy talk, the U.S. Army is now waging war on cancer. In 2022, they announced they were going to start a new program against cancer. And the program is called Applied Proteogenomics, Organizational Learning and Outcomes. And I said, what kind of hellacious title is that? Right? And then I said, oh, wait a minute. I was in the military. Acronyms. They love their acronyms. What's the acronym for that name? It's Apollo. Everywhere you go in medicine, there's Apollo. There are Apollo Pharmaceuticals. The largest pharmaceutical chain in the world is the Apollo Pharmaceutical chain in India. They have Apollo Cancer Centers in India. An Apollyon Hospital in Greece. Apollyon, by the way, in the Bible was the god of the pit, right? Hades, essentially, Satan. So there's that. I mean, you cannot turn around and not find Apollo. And one of my favorite ones is that one of the hospital near me in Omaha, the University of Nebraska Medical Center. And I'm sure they're not alone. So I'm not trying to just ping on them, but I'm saying that for verification. how do you get into your patient's chart in the middle of the night if you need to write an order? Well, here's what you do. You go to your computer and you get into you open up a portal. Now, language, the world is made of syntax. When you understand how the words and the syntax are created, then you can change your world. But a portal in the ancient thinking of the occult was, and the occult just means hidden, is a demonic pathway. Right. So you go through this portal and you hook up with the software. You do a handshake and a password, secret handshake and password with this software in the hospital that then will give you permission to get to your patient's chart. Right. What's the name of the software? It's the Apollo software. I'm not making this up. Every time you turn around. And finally, I'll just say, when you come to 2019 and we got coronavirus, okay, this is what they wanted to tell us, coronavirus. Now, at that time in 2019, I believed in viruses. I mean, I thought there were viruses. It's not about belief in medicine. It's about preponderance of evidence. But I thought the evidence was there were viruses. I don't believe that now. But the name coronavirus, I knew what it meant. The coronavirus came because the name was from a crown, right? That's, they say it under the electron microscope, it's a crown. Well, it turns out if you actually see the first electron microscope of SARS-CoV-2, this purported coronavirus, it just looks like a blob on your windshield. It doesn't look like anything related to a crown. However, here's why they call it coronavirus, actually, because Asclepius, who was the purported, we were taught in medical school, Asclepius was the god of medicine. They always keep the real bad guys in the background so you don't know what's going on, and they put out a front man, and Asclepius is the front man. And so he, it's kind of like Klaus Schwab, you know. So Asclepius is the purported god of medicine, but he's actually the son of Apollo. He's a demigod. Apollo got a human woman pregnant. At the end of her pregnancy, she tried to escape him. He sweeps down off Mount Olympus and chases her down and murders her just before she's to give birth. And he does the first C-section, and out comes Asclepius. That's the ancient story. But what's mom's name? What is Asclepius' mother's name that just got murdered by Apollo? Coronis. And you'll find Coronis everywhere in medicine. Coronis Pharmaceuticals, Coronis Optique, Coronis, you know, it's everywhere. Coronis Hospitals, Coronis, there's one radiology. So this was not named because it looks like anything under electron microscope. This is an homage to an ancient pagan religion, and it's a religion of poisoning. And just to conclude, I will say, this is what really woke me up to the reality of what's happening. Plato, who wrote about the same time the Hippocratic Oath came out, about 400 BC, he writes the Socratic Dialogues. And in Book 5 on marriage, Socrates is talking to his student, and they're talking about, he says, they're talking about marriage. This is the book on marriage, but they're talking about breeding animals. And he says, you know, I see you have all these hunting dogs and all your, you know, animals around here. You don't just let them willy-nilly breed, do you? And he said, well, no, of course not. Of course not, you know? And so they start talking about how to control society. You don't want just anybody getting married to anybody. You know, this is the eugenics program in 400 BC. And at the end, he says, you know, in the future, physicians will have to be made of sterner stuff. And his student Glaucon says, well, why is that? And he says, well, you know, anybody can give a good diet. That's what Hippocrates' first thing in the oath is: do the best diet for your patient, which is probably the most important thing. Well, but he says, well, you know, anybody can do that, and you don't need a real trained tough guy to do that. But you're going to need sterner physicians in the future, because we're going to use medicines to control the size of the state, so it doesn't get too large or too small. It will be the use of medicine. He says this in Plato's Republic, that is considered the most important political treatise in the world history. You know, you don't get out of Yale without studying Plato's Republic. You know, I didn't get out of my little liberal arts college without doing that. So what's been going on for a very long time? That's my reason to be concerned about what's really happening in medicine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I had Apollo written down on my piece of paper here because I watched your video. It's proven science is systematically ignored. It cannot be by accident.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a brilliant. Just you talking about something that was just mind blowing to me, and I've got a few questions about that. But you were talking about proteogenomics in that, weren't you? Alongside all this, can you just explain what that word means?
Well, yeah, proteogenomics really, and I'm not an expert in this part of it, but at all. But proteogenomics is just studying proteins. About people think because we can sequence DNA, which we can do. I think we can sequence DNA. The whole genetic thing's not what they're telling you, but we can do that. But proteins are a harder thing, because there's a specific unique shape to each protein, and it's we're all electromagnetic. At the end of the day, we're all electromagnetic. So it depends on electromagnetic bonding, has to be in the right shape. Your enzymes are a perfect example. They have to fit into the receptor, and if they don't have the right shape, they can't do their job. And we don't know, even though we sequence the human genome, we only know about what 5% does. Okay, so, and that's a really interesting, that's in my book, which this is a preview of the kind of stuff I tell you in my book. So one of the things about, and you don't find this literature in English, this is from the Russians, Pyotr Gayev is his name, Gayev. And so we looked at DNA and how it makes proteins. Those are called the codons. That's all we were seemingly interested in. I'm sure there's more, and I'm not trying to oversimplify this, but that was our primary focus. Whereas the Russians, they took the DNA and they said they had linguists on their team and they had physicists on their team. And the first thing they discovered was that DNA is coded in an ancient proto-language. They think it might be the proto-languages of all languages. And it uses syntax, and it uses, grammar, syntax, and spelling essentially to do its job. That a protein that is in a dog, for example, that just happens to be the same protein that's in a human, the codon might be, let's say they use the letters like CGTA for as shorthand for the nucleic acids that make up DNA. So let's say it's CTA in humans, it might be CTG in the dog, but it's the same protein. But because it's in a dog, it's maybe slightly different, or it has to fit into the dog. So in any case, it's kind of like if I tell you there are too many mice in the garage, you would know to spell it TOO, not TO. So DNA understands that, which means it's got to have a homunculus, a structure, a prototype you in your DNA that it can always build to. And yours is different than mine, and mine is different than the dog. So it understands that, and it works through language. But the second thing they discovered is that DNA is a fractal antenna. And I'm not sure they were the ones that really discovered that, but they took it a step further. DNA is a transformer of sound. It transforms sound into holographic reality. That's a big one. And think about, in the beginning was the word. So the existence is being spoken into, is through sound becoming what we appear to be, which is three-dimensional reality. But we're not. We're just electromagnetic sound waves and light waves. And so that's what they learned. And then the third thing that I thought was super interesting, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more, but these are the three things I can remember. They bombarded this DNA that they had in some vials. They were testing DNA, and they showed how it hit by using a laser. The physicists could do it by using a laser. They saw how DNA kind of unwound itself and gave off light, did all sorts of cool stuff. Well, one day they accidentally zorched this DNA. So they just burned it to a crisp. They over zorched it with the laser. So they thought there was no DNA there. Now, to back up, Dr. Luc Montagnier and then Jacques Benveniste, two scientists in two different parts of the world, all discovered that big molecules, molecules like DNA or like immunoglobulin, they have an electromagnetic signature. And they believed that signature could be captured in water, and the water would have the effect of the molecule, even if the molecule wasn't there. And that was what got Luc Montagnier in trouble, and he was the famous Nobel laureate for finding, quote, HIV. But in any case, what happened is when they were studying the electromagnetic signature of the DNA, but now they'd zorched it with the laser. They were going to just throw it out. But they checked it, and there was still an electromagnetic signature there. And they said, well, there must be some DNA right down in there, but we can't have it. We don't want that signature right now, so we'll have to get rid of it. So they took the vial out of the whole process and threw it away, or got rid of it. And they put a clean vial that had never been touched with any DNA in that space. But they tested again with their equipment to see if they could find a signature. The signature was still there. So it wasn't the water, and it is not the molecule there. It's like essentially a ghost. They called it ghost DNA. It's like a DNA, and then they followed it just because, and it's in exactly the same spot as it was before they killed it. They followed it, and that signal decreased slightly every day for 40 days, and then it was gone. Now think about the magic number there, 40, how much it seems to occur in the Bible, and also in Russian Orthodox religion. It turns out they believe the soul lingers for 40 days wherever you died.
Wow.
Wow. Well, you know, if you go back to the Q post, right, they want your DNA, protect your DNA. Like, we don't realize and know or have been taught how sacred and how amazing we are, right? And then when you hear about like manifestation, right, thinking something and then it appearing, you know, it's like very woo-woo, but is it, you know, or have we just been dumbed down? Have they destroyed us so much with the poisons and the...
Well, I don't know if you saw it, but I'm kind of a Telegram freak. I love Telegram. But
Yeah,
there was a guy that was on there, and I can't remember the channel now, or I'd find it. I put it on my channel, which is Freedom Doc 1 on Telegram. But in any case, what he I can probably find his name pretty quick, but he just put out, he was a CERN scientist. He was at CERN. So not sure what side of the equation he's on, but he decided to speak out. And maybe I didn't put it on. Yeah, there he is. Jordan Chain is his name, apparently. And no, Dr. Bernardo Castro. He worked at CERN, and he spent years deep inside the world of high-level science and technology, but something didn't add up. And today he's one of the few respected voices claiming that reality is not made of matter. It is made of mind. And they go into it, according to him, everything we experience is a projection of consciousness. Now, they don't mention God. I don't think it's just our consciousness. I think that there's a universal consciousness that's much bigger than us, and that is the creator. And I think they don't want to admit that. They want to think they can all do it themselves. You know, I think that's what this old pagan religion is about. That's what the occult practices are about, is to manipulate the world. But they know it's true. You can manipulate the world through thought and through chanting and through doing the things that they do in these, you know, like the guy, I'm blanking on his name, the evilest man in the world. What was his name?
Yoval Noah Harari or Klaus Schwab?
Well, he might be number 2. I know I'm talking about the guy.
Crowley?
What's that?
Aleister Crowley?
No, he's dead. He's long dead, but he was in California, and he had the church, oh shoot, I can just picture him. Well, he looks like Barbara Bush. That's the joke. But yeah, I'll think of his name. But anyway, he had this religion that he was practicing with the people in California in the 30s and 40s, World War II time frame, and that's what they did. I mean, they manipulated the world through their joint practices, sex, magic, all sorts of things. It's not Anton LaVey. I almost had it. I'll think of his name. His name will come to me. But it's, in fact, there's a TV show about him, about Jack Parsons, who was part of the joint. He was the Joint Propulsion Lab guy that really started NASA going, because he developed the rocketry.
Well, every one of those people we've just named is all right, motley crew all together anyway, aren't they?
Together. But, you know, it's interesting because we're talking about like the I want to use the word extreme.
Aleister Crowley, excuse me. I had to tell you before I forgot.
Oh,
Aleister Crowley, you know Aleister Crowley.
Right. So, you know, we're talking about like all these practices and occult things, but just think of it this way. If you break it down to a very simple, if you're constantly thinking of something, don't you manifest it? Like, it's not even.
That's why it's true. That whole thing. They know it's true. They just don't want us to know.
You believe you're poor, you're going to stay poor. If you believe you're fat, you're never going to be able to lose that weight, or at least keep it off. Like, we could give a million, and then as soon as someone changes that trajectory or works on their belief system, magically, you know, everything good things start to appear, opportunities. So it's not even so, I mean, they use those methods, those practices for evil, right? For evil. Right. But just practically, if you don't take a good or evil effect, doesn't that happen anyway? So people just are starting, I think, to realize your thoughts matter, your words matter, and it's becoming a little bit more the mainstream, like I'm a coach, so that we're very big on, your mindset and your thoughts and your words and your self-love and all that kind of stuff. So it's
Well, I think there's been a psychological operation to not connect the two between what's done in church. Why did they want to shut down churches? And then when you got into church, they wanted you to sit apart from each other, and they didn't want you singing. What's wrong with singing in church? Because when people chant or they sing or they do rhythmic sounds, it helps this process.
Yeah.
They know it. They're doing it. While we were all shut down, they were having black masses on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. So they're doing it. But we were not supposed to do it. Other people were not supposed to do it. And that's people need to realize their language. You don't want to, because people don't want to say, well, we don't do, occult chanting and things like that. Well, call it what you will, but the effects are, you're just not, praying to the devil, presumably,
right.
Hopefully in the churches, but that's what's happening. I mean, they know it works, and it has to do with the whole holographic nature of reality. Look, how about time? How about the passage of time? You asked me at the beginning what woke me up. One of the things I saw that I have read about or seen pictures of, and I just could not believe I'd ever see it, was an airplane stuck in the sky right over my head, running. I mean, this was a plane. You could hear it. My husband thought it might be a small military jet, but it was low. It was fairly low, but it was a jet, and it was just stationary. It wasn't one of these things where you're going parallel and it just is an optical illusion. This literally, we drove under this plane, and I was almost speechless. I couldn't think to take a picture fast enough, but I could see under the fuselage. I could see the seams. I could see everything, the lights flashing, but it wasn't moving. Now, how do we explain that? I mean, there's something else going on in our reality that's causing this. And and to make sure I wasn't completely crazy, the next day, I looked up any reports of this, and I discovered that there was a NOTAM, a no-fly order that was put out. That happened about 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night. In the evening, it was dark. It was winter, and in the morning, there was a NOTAM from like that night until 10 o'clock the next morning of all U.S. and Canada. So they knew something had happened. Okay. And I don't know what it is. So I don't know I don't know what's going on, but those kinds of things make you realize the world is not what we think about. I always tell people, don't go sing the birthday song on your birthday. It's made to aid you. Your DNA is always listening. So think about what you do when you go to a birthday party. They stand around you in a circle. Now think of these occult practices. You stand around in a circle. You have a bunch of candles. You make a wish. They chant the song in unison. It's repetitive. You say the thing over and over, and then you make the wish, blow out the candle. So a big ceremony to convince you now you are older, and you're going to be older next year and next year and next year. But maybe that's not necessary.
Yeah. Perfect. Age is just a number.
Not to mention that we're birthed, which is a whole marriage thing.
Oh, yeah. By a doctor, etc., etc. The birth canal, all this.
Yeah, no, and our birthright and all that. Yeah, we've been hijacked, and I see if I can find it's in my book. I wish I could find my I don't know if I have a copy on this computer, but it's by Terence McKenna. Maybe I have it in my phone. It's a really great quote about exactly what we're talking about.
Is this where he says the world is just going to get more crazy and crazy and crazy? I've got that video somewhere.
Oh, no, this one is about, let me see. I just have to find my quotes in my phone, but I think that's where, yeah, no, somewhere in there. I don't know how to find anything. There we go. Yeah. Well, I don't want to hold you up. If I find it, I'll jump out with it. But it's by Terence McKenna, and it's about the syntactical nature of the world. That the world is made of words, and once you know how to manipulate the words, you'll know the way the world works and how to navigate through it. Essentially, is what it says.
Yeah, because it's all like spells. It's all
right.
casting.
And just in everyday talk, are you familiar with this whole thing with Trump going down to take King Charles to the beehive?
Yeah.
And you're familiar with this whole beekeeper thing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. The beekeeper was Jason Statham. The beekeeper is the guy that has to clean up the mess sometimes, and otherwise is very peaceful. But bees, I'm telling you, you know, we don't realize we are probably, in my opinion, we are probably the only non-sentient people or non-telepathic organisms on this planet. You're supposed to go down, if the beekeeper dies, you're supposed to go down and tell the bees. Any major change in your world, you're supposed to tell the bees. So I think that's what happened when Trump took King Charles down to the bees. I think he kind of told him, okay, your time is up and we're taking back the world, kind of thing. But I've actually, I know this sounds absolutely, I'd never, if before all this, I'd never would have done these things, but I couldn't find my cat that normally comes in at a certain time. And I was getting kind of worried because there was a coyote out in the back. And I said, I literally was down at I have some bees. I'm a beekeeper of sorts. And I went down to the bees and I just said, I know this sounds crazy, guys, but if you see Shadow, would you send him home? He was home within 2 minutes. If I was late, when the bees were new, if I was late feeding them, the bees would come to me. They'd send an emissary and I'd be out in the garden or something. And here'd be this bee and it would land on my hand. It was like 10 minutes late for the feeding. And I'd say, okay, I'm coming, guys. And then I'd go and feed them. And one time I was far away and 3 bees came. They had to get 3 bees out to go get me because I was way across the pasture. Then again, goes in front of your face, lands on your hand, tells me it's time to feed us. I'm telling you, this happens. Cats can sense when now that I'm retired, I have time to observe these things. Cats know when somebody's out there. Like they'll know when the other cat's out there that needs to come in. And or if I can't find the little rescue kitten and she's out somewhere and I'm trying to find her, and I'll ask the big cat, can you find? He just goes in like a pointer. Now, we don't speak the same language, but he knows what I need, and it's unbelievable.
They know everything, like even
animals
weather,
know.
right? They know, that it's going to start raining. Like my dog starts getting anxious and she starts getting you're right. We have been so and of course, so many animals, especially if you live in a trafficky area, they're so overly domesticated, just like we are.
And they're all vaccinated.
Well,
it's pretty interesting because I grew up in farm country, and farmers don't they don't get rabies vaccines. I looked into rabies as a scam too, like they're talking about. I'm not saying there isn't a problem that sometimes happens, but it's not because of a virus that you can somehow eliminate by these vaccines. These animals are healthy looking animals, and my unvaccinated cats are really healthy. And when I look around in my community, the ones that are outside in the yards and running around every once in a while, they're all fat, they're slow, they're not healthy looking. I remember the world hasn't just changed for us, it's changed for them. My mother used to feed our cats whiting. She'd just go down to the grocery store, get fresh fish, chop it up and give it to them. That was their another beef hearts and things like that. You can't get that at your local grocery store anymore, even for you.
Yeah, I know. It's an interesting exercise that I would invite people to do. I started watching some old shows from the late 60s and 70s, like Columbo and some of these other shows that were on. And it's very interesting because the culture of what was considered normal you can see in those old shows versus what today is. Just an example, like everyone had a handgun, by the side of their bed for an intruder, right? They weren't using it on each other. And it's not a big deal, and of course it has to do with the murder.
It still is that way in the Midwest and in America.
But as a rule, they have vilified this, and young people are afraid. They're afraid, and it's terrible. So it's interesting if you look back, even the foods they were eating. Like every couple of episodes, he's walking around with a hard-boiled egg. That was his breakfast. There's all these things. Now, I know probably outside of the United States, something like that is more common as a breakfast, but they've vilified the egg. I mean, we could go on for hours about that. And it's very interesting because what is that? 40, 50 years? It's not that long that these things, right? But now a whole generation or 2 generations have come and they have no recollection. of
Well, that is the key. I mean, the Sumerians may not have been primitive, that they carved things in stone. They just knew how history worked. You know, everything in medicine, this whole idea, and that's, I think, the video you referred to. So I'm talking about how they have used parasites and other things to create a cancer problem. The cancer is not endemic. It's not natural. And once you know how it's done, you know how to get out of this. Well, what was my point? There was a guy named William Russell, and he was a famous pathologist in the 1890s, 1880s. And he said, I have discovered the characteristic organism of cancer. And he goes on to discuss a parasite. But you read what I learned in the 1970s, and it's already been changed. Now they didn't quote him. They just said they call these Russell bodies, as if they're some unknown little blur, because he was looking at fresh things, fresh smears of these cancer cells. We're looking at stained cancer cells that are dead, that aren't moving. We're not seeing the same things. I don't have a pathologist friend anymore since I've awakened to this whole thing, and I'd love to have this discussion with one. What are you looking at that's fresh smear, other than, because I used to send things from the OR all the time. I'd go in and do biopsy of a spine of somebody that they wanted me to, and that would go fresh first, but it was usually just to see that they had enough tissue. That's not what they look at. They stain it, they kill it, and then they look at it. So they've changed reality by changing the history, and that is what's happening. What you're saying is exactly what's happening. And I come from a very old family. My grandfather was born in 1892. And that generation, if they didn't, fall under the wagon or die in childbirth, they routinely lived into their late 80s, 90s, even hundreds.
Yeah.
And it was after World War II, a lot of things came in. We got the people think Project Paperclip was around about, von Braun and the rocket scientists, but the number one target was actually of Project Paperclip, of the U.S. Army going in and trying to scoop up the German scientists before the Russians got them. Well, our primary target was chemists. And so before World War II, we used to preserve wheat, which was not semi-dwarf hybrid wheat. It was the old-time wheat. We preserved it using iodine, which is a great thing to be taking in your diet. But after World War II, they took out the iodine, they put in bromine.
Yep.
And bromine screws up your thyroid. It screws up your brain. I mean, because the thyroid is necessary for the brain. So it competes with iodine, which is what you need for good brain health and everything else. So bromine's and you can get non-brominated flour, but most people don't think to do it. I didn't. As a physician, I didn't until later. I did later. But yeah, so there's a lot of things like that are just hidden. It's not just the glyphosate and the few things that we're focused on. You're right. It's the whole food system. We don't eat the same way. Everything is artificial. Even if I have my garden. I have a farm that I have cattle on. So I have access to home raised stuff quite a bit of the year. But, you can't, unless you're full-time farming, and really even farmers don't take care of themselves. Like my grandfather, when he was a young man and just married, and he eventually started a blacksmith shop. But if somebody had come to him, and I know my great-grandfather who homesteaded the farm, if somebody had come to him and said, we have an idea for you. Don't grow your own family's food. We'll grow you're such a good blacksmith. Just we'll feed you. We'll give you you can buy the food from us, and we'll buy your blacksmith stuff from you. And then you don't have to worry about the food. I think he would have thought they were crazy, because they knew about food security back then.
Yeah.
And if you didn't take care of the food security, you were in trouble, but not everybody could always bail you out. See, now we're all dependent on this 3-day supply chain that goes to the grocery stores and is filled with poisonous things.
Yeah.
That's how and it just started slowly, and it's gotten worse and worse.
Yeah.
So
go ahead. Sorry, one of the major things they took iodine out of and put bromine in was bread, wasn't it? And this is a staple that just so many people eat. Now, a lot of us now, when we eat bread, we don't feel very well. I'll let Elisa carry on, but I just wanted to say, when you were talking about the bees there, you probably can't see that.
Oh, is that the bee on the back of the coin?
At that exact time, when Trump was doing that with King Charles, I found a £1 coin in my pocket with 2 bees on it. I've never seen it before, and that, you know, it was a beautiful synchronicity. That was.
That is beautiful. What's the where? That's a British coin or?
Yeah, it's a £1 coin.
I'll be darned.
Yeah, I've never seen one before.
Well, they won't be having bees on it in the future, I don't think.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Elisa,
I was going to ask you two questions just from a practical standpoint, because what we always try in some way on our show to identify the evil, the bad, and then turn it positive, right? You know, in terms of people can help themselves, or just that maybe the world is changing for the better, you know. Iodine. What is your suggestion on how people take it? How much? Like, is there some rules? Like, I know iodine's important, so I ordered it, and then I was like, what am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so that it is very important. And, but to back up, what I'll say is one of the failures of, I mean, it's not a failure. This is their plan. When they took over medicine, the practice of medicine, and they codified it and made it, all universities had to be teaching the same thing, like those things that happened in the 1920s and 30s. Okay. They also decided, oh, we got all this science now that we can understand these diseases. And they decided, you know, in time of Hippocrates, there were only a few root causes of diseases. But now they telling us we have 140, I think we're up to 114,000 or 140,000 diseases that are all have different codes that get put into those big books so that your electronic medical records know what you got, right? So that's how we know the number. I mean, it's incredibly stupid, but the problem is modern medicine, there's a philosophy, and the philosophy is you have to have a precise, before you do anything, if you have a problem, you come in, you have to have a precise diagnosis, and then we'll do some testing, and then we'll give you a precise treatment. That's what they're calling precision medicine, and they're going to, you know, ramp that up and amplify it by computers and AI and stuff. But that's not the way the real works. Okay. What that gives you is what an old professor of mine called the Ulysses syndrome. You know, Ulysses or Odysseus, he started out from Greece and he was called to the war. And as he's going, all these terrible things happen to him. But at the end of the day, after 20 years, he ends up right back where he started. This is modern medicine. You go from doctor to doctor and specialist, and you get different medicines and they get side effects. And then you do something else. And at the end of the day, you're still sick with the same thing. And you spend a lot of money and a lot of time. That's what we're trying. That's escaping the medical matrix, is getting out of that thinking. It's not about changing the pills in your cabinet. It's about figuring out how to think about medicine. So the answer is to go back to the basics. Are there 150 diseases or 10 diseases, or what are there? Well, in my mind, I've come up with 7, but there might be a few more, but they're the root causes of disease. Okay. If we believe that we are electromagnetic children of God living on the land that we were meant to be on, then that we are, that light and sound and all of this affects us, then how do we look at what disease is? And so, for example, one of the big problems is that in ancient times, our soils were not poisoned, I mean, as they are today. And so when you grew crops, you got mineralized. You got all these great minerals out of the soil, but we're deficient in our soil minerals. Even if you go back to the ancient seabeds and you get, because I have a product on my site called the Foundation Pack, which I think that's where I start everybody. But it's still not complete. Like you're talking about iodine. That's how I'm going to get to iodine. It's still not complete because in the ancient times, we were, you know, we lived on the shores for the most part. We lived around natural water that had iodine. We didn't have to worry about that. But now we're inland. We have areas like I live in what's called the goiter belt because it's so low in iodine that people always got their big thyroids trying to struggle. So you have to do things a little differently than our ancient ancestors did, but it's this general principles. And the first principle is it's not just about iodine. So I've made this mistake. Everybody makes this mistake that you think you're going to solve whatever problems that are, or you go to a meeting and you hear a good idea about a new supplement and then you stick it in your cabinet and pretty soon your cabinet's filled with all these supplements. You can't remember what they're for. You spent a lot of money and now you just end up throwing them out or getting rid of them because you can't remember what they're for. So, don't do that. So start with, you need something. I used to think this was crazy. I never used to take these things, but these drinks that have what Joel Wallach that came up with the Foundation Pack, and I'm sure you have it where you are, the longevity system. they he was a very well-known, he was actually a veterinarian and became a naturopath later, but he was given a government grant to do autopsies of animals to see what was, and then see what the disease was that was the problem. And it turned out that he, after like 30,000 animal autopsies or something, and so then they started doing some humans, and they compared them with their mineral levels in the body. And they found out that mineral deficiency was the #1 reason for chronic disease across the board. And that there are 90 essential nutrients you have to have. If you, now, it's a chain of metabolic events. So it's nice to have 60, but you're not going to have the full effect because you're missing some. I mean, how many people in COVID, for example, that got in the hospital or just were sick for a couple of weeks, and this happens, we see it in people that come in for surgery unexpectedly and they're in the hospital for a few weeks. Their hair, a lot of people will have their hair, not a lot, but some people will have their hair fall out. It's common. It's not uncommon. And I heard that in COVID a lot, that, hey, you know, my hair just isn't growing and stuff. Well, if you don't have enough minerals, what happens is your body has to turn off those in times of stress, it turns off those things that are really important to keep preserving your heart, your lungs, your liver, stuff that's really important. It turns off the stuff you can live without, your fingernails, growth of your hair, things like that. So the big picture is you got to put good minerals in your tank. Iodine's one of them. So I use that pack because it gives you a broad, you're not going to miss things like chromium, for example. How many doctors know that chromium deficiency can lead to diabetes? With insufficient chromium, you don't handle your glucose right.
Wow.
So there's lots of these little things that we didn't, and we only know about these.
Insulin.
Right. What are the ones we don't know about? So this is stuff that's made from an ancient seabed, and I'm sure other people make this product, but it gives you that basis. But then we come to iodine. So now we know iodine is really important in vitamin D. These are a couple things that are really important, and because of our new modern lifestyle, they're not in the seabed. We can't get them from our native soils like we used to. So I put together in my shop, I have a thing called Rebel Immunity, and it's those things we've learned from COVID plus what I knew about some other things like iodine. I have the Japanese dose of iodine. Now, if the sea salts the salt, iodinized salt is just nonsense. It's just so little that it's very not useful. I mean, it's just micrograms. So I have, but what they have in America is called the RDA, the recommended daily allowance, and it's just inserting a number of micrograms, which is way too low. The Chinese have studied this. They know that if you have insufficient iodine, you have decreased IQ, you have all sorts of bad things happen. We know this too. We're just not practicing it. It turns out, so I have the Japanese dose of iodine. The average Japanese who eats a lot of seaweed, that has very high stuff, but they eat a lot of it. You can't get the seaweed-based vitamin that gives you 150 micrograms. They get 12.5 milligrams. So the funny thing is, on my label on my bottle, it says this is 88,888% of the RDA, and I said that's okay. RDA actually stands for recommended death allowance, so we don't care what they think. So iodine is a big one, and if you take iodine, a lot of women have noticed like their breast lumps go down. You have iodine pumps everywhere, in the breast, in the prostate, in all sorts of parts of the human body. We don't know exactly what they're for, but when you have pumping mechanisms to get iodine into your cells, it's important. Listen to what your body's telling you. So I think one of the things people can do that can really make things better right away is mineralize yourself, fill up your tank. So you're ready for, if there's an emergency, you can drive that. It's like your gas tank. You don't put cheap gas in your Corvette or your Rolls Royce or something. And if there's an emergency, have enough gas in there so you can get there. So we don't do that. We eat junk and we don't get enough minerals. So mineralize yourself. And then I add iodine for sure at the Japanese dose. Now, one of the nice things too is if you've been eating wheat, which I think in fact, who was it? There's some famous, poo-poo male actor that just said, wow, I've just been feeling bad for years. And I just went to a guy and get one change and I just feel better. And he actually looks better. And it turns out he went gluten-free. Okay. Well, I discovered this like 15 years ago. I'm going to tell you, wheat is one of the most toxic foods you can eat, and the bromine is inhibiting your ability to even use the iodine from a supplement. So getting rid of wheat makes a huge difference. But so take the 90 essential nutrients or something equivalent, take iodine at the Japanese level minimum. Now, if you want to flush that bromine out of your system, they have done a thing where they give up to 50 milligrams of iodine daily. And I just went through one about a few weeks ago because I just decided I'm just going to do this again just to see if I test things on myself. And, and of course, I'm full-size human. If you're small, you might want to lower the dose a little bit. But these guys went around, and I think it's Dr. Brownstein. The book is called Iodine, or the Iodine Project or something. He's got one on salt. Anyway, and it tells you about this. And you can take 50 milligrams a day, which will saturate your system in iodine and then push out the bromine. So that will help you going ahead in the future. Otherwise, that bromine is kind of stuck there. But generally 12.5 milligrams is the Japanese dose. And they have the lowest rate of breast cancer in the world. I'm not saying it's a cause and effect necessarily, but when you start seeing it other places, people lose their breast lumps when they take iodine. It kind of makes you think there's something there. Vitamin D is really key. Now, this shows you what government, first of all, my rule of thumb is, my son's a surgeon, and I sent him my labs that I got from some test I did, which I normally don't test my labs very often, but I went one year to something and I got a test, and he said, "Damn, Mom, you're just euboxic," which means you're right in the center of normal everywhere. I was all right in there, sometimes on the high of normal, but that's okay. And he says, "You must know something that a lot of these people, my patients, don't know." And I said, "Yeah, I never listen to government recommendations." Well, now I have another theory, and that is whatever the government recommendation is, if they say go right, you go left. And here's a perfect example with vitamin D. So vitamin D, when I was in 1989, I guess this was, or 1988, I was studying for my orthopedic boards, and I did a 2-week review course. The Navy sent me. It was nice for this. And the guy was Joseph Lane. He was a world famous orthopedic bone specialist. And he said at the time, you in America cannot get enough vitamin D from the sun, even if you live in the sunniest city of America, which was Yuma, Arizona, where I actually ended up practicing orthopedics. So I can tell you that's true. Even there, people's levels were extremely low, golfers and things. So he said, you need to take 10,000 international units a day in order, if you really want to have good bones when you're older. And that's also true. I used to see people with adult rickets all the time. And so that's lack of vitamin D, and you get soft abnormal bone. And these aren't kids with rickets that we think of. These are 70-year-old women. What was going on? I didn't want to be like that. So all my life, I've taken 10,000 units a day. Then come to COVID. This shows you how government recommendations are absolutely not right. While he was saying 10,000 units a day, the Institute of Medicine, the CDC, was still saying 400 international units a day. 400 versus 10,000. Now, this guy was not some schlep. This guy was a international bone specialist. And you guys can't figure this out? See, we always used to think they're just making mistakes. No, they're keeping us sick. Scotland knows about it. Scotland, I don't know if they still do it, but for a long time, they would offer, you could have a free 5,000 international unit bottle of vitamin D every day. Just come in and pick it up because they knew it kept people out of the hospital and off the government paying for the hospital, right? So vitamin D. But in COVID, what happened? They were still saying 400 units a day. I think they're up to 600 units a day. But in Indonesia, they did a study. It's a 700-bed hospital. They did of all these COVID patients. They had like 800, 900 COVID patients come through, and they looked at who was it that was going to the ICU or dying versus who was it that just kind of came, got toned up a little bit, and went home. How is there a discriminatory thing here? The biggest discriminator was vitamin D level. Now, I want my vitamin D level to be 80 or up there, which they think is, ooh, that's really high, but that's what I want. That's what probably nature gave you years ago. But their average, the cutoff was 30, which is really the death level. I mean, 20 is the lower level of what you call normal. Trust me, that's not normal. 30 was the level. If you were above 30, you had less than a 5% chance of dying or going to the ICU. Simple thing, cheap. Okay. So here we are. Let's see, that's 2020. This is now 2026, 6 years later. What's the Institute of Medicine, or what's the CDC's level? 600 units of vitamin D. Are they completely brain dead? You know, if they really wanted us healthy, this is a simple one. I always tell people, people say, well, I get out in the sun. I said, unless you're naked on the equator or in a loincloth and you don't shower, you're not absorbing it, transforming it, you're not getting it. So trust me on this.
So with regard to
those three things alone will make a huge difference in people's lives.
Well, I've been out running today, not naked or just with my shorts on and stuff, but I know I'm constantly in the sun telling people. I bet
you if you study your level now, maybe you're at the lower. You might even be lower. What's your latitude?
I'm not. We're north of the equator here.
Yeah, we are too. And so if you look at northern Mexico, basically on the Mexican-American border, that's where, and I'm telling you, that's not far enough south. You got to be closer to the equator.
But what I mean is I don't use sun cream and stuff like that. I'm always telling, and my dad's sort of been like that his whole life. His skin's like an old leather shoe now, you know what I mean? But he's 86, healthy as you like. Well, sort of, but I still take vitamin D.
Yeah, I think it's both.
Well.
Yeah,
and I think the ones I take, the little soft gels, I think they're 4,000, maybe. You know, so yeah.
Well, here's the other thing I want to mention. You know, like obviously I'm not a doctor, but I'm a health coach, so I try to get people to think more healthy, and it's also where are you getting it from? Like, in other words, like I've taken for many, many years, I take an isotonic version. It's a powder mixed with water, whatever, has a little bit higher bioavailability, because a lot of people don't realize when you take a hard vitamin, it has to break down. So by the time it breaks down in the stomach, you're not even getting what's on the label. But I always heard, and tell me if this is the one I take, which is 5,000 per serving. So I'll take like 1 or 2 a day.
Yeah.
Isn't it important to also have certain things, like in other words, it's D3 or you need K2, like there,
right?
You
it's
buy a cheap ass brand like in Costco and feel like you're getting, same with omegas. Like people don't understand like that they have to get a quality. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so vitamin D, generally, you want to have it. You need vitamin D will build bone, but it doesn't direct where that bone is. You don't want to build it in your arteries. K2 apparently helps you direct it, so you're only doing it in the bone. It protects your arteries from getting any thing from the vitamin D. So I think that's the way to go. I'm going to try and get a combination. I know on my side I haven't got it yet, but the other thing is it's a fat soluble vitamin, so I like to have it in an oily capsule, but you don't want oily capsules to sit on a hot dock and the oil to go rancid. This is the problem when people take the omega-3s that are, I'm not going to mention Costco because it's not just them, but people that they're not in the business of really thinking about quality vitamins. They're in the business of, mass producing, keeping the cost down, quality they compromise on quality and cost. Okay? And I get that, and I shop there all the time, so I'm not opposed to them. But I just say, in this situation, I don't want rancid oil in my capsules. So there's an argument for getting that's where you get somebody that they don't let it sit out on the dock. They're moving this stuff through. They're selling it rapidly. It's not in storage a long period of time. So that's what I look for.
Yeah.
And
have you heard, because I've heard like through that sometimes the quality, I don't know if it's legal or illegal or whatever, but a lot of times it's not the oil you think you're getting too. Like it could be hydrogenated oil, it could be seed oil. Like you have to don't know. You have to make sure it's, to the best of your ability, something from a quality company, distributor, that you're getting. And I think unfortunately, this is just my opinion, a lot of people go out and they think they're doing the right thing for their health, and without the right research, they may just not be helping the problem,
Right. And that's why I say that, to me, it has to be simple enough that people will actually be able to follow the program. And so I think having 1 million bottles and putting them out is not the way to go, except for vitamin D and iodine. I think those and vitamin C. I think those 3 things, if you're going to supplement, they've got to be separate, because you don't want to mix them with certain things, and you want to have the quality. You want to really look at the quality there. Then you put all these minerals and things you can buy in these group things, the big bulk in the powder, mix it up into a drink, and you've got 99% of what you need right there in terms of supplements. And then you concentrate on your diet, on your exercise, on your red light therapy, IR saunas, infrared saunas. The biggest, one of the biggest anti-aging things is exercise, is keeping yourself fit. I mean, I love weight training. I think that's the healthiest thing to do. Statistically, you're more likely to keep the weight off, and you strengthen your bone, and you're functional. It's like looking at the farmers before we had all the mechanized stuff, and my farmer's still like this. I mean, he doesn't go to the gym. He's just solid muscle, though, because he's constantly lifting and moving and doing things. And so whatever reproduces that, as that old commercial for some gym used to say, I'm supposed to lift, the Arnold Schwarzenegger accent, lift up heavy things and put them down. That's really what we were, and it's not a popular thing to say necessarily, but I don't see these people that are runners when they're younger and they run for exercise. There are very few of them when they get older keep that up. Whereas it's easier to keep up weight training. And I think it gives you, and your muscles are, she was looking a little worried and then she blipped off, I hope.
I think the dog might have attacked her or something. She's there. She's fine. Yeah, I mean, that's perfect. I mean, I distill all my water now. So I take Celtic sea salt as well, because
absolutely.
Now I've heard you talk about, I mean, you take 2 teaspoons of some sort of salt every day, don't you, in a drink? And the important, it's something else they've lied to us about salt, because obviously when you go to the hospital, the first thing they do is put you on a saline bag, isn't it?
Yeah, isn't that funny? Even though they want to tell you not to. Yeah, there's a book called Salt, again by Dr. Brownstein, and I was in the back of a lecture. I was speaking at Weston A. Price on something else a couple of years ago, and I just happened to stumble into his lecture just to kill some time, and I'm in the back of his lecture, and he's got this slide on, and it's a bar graph, and there's a tall bar graph on one side, and then there are all these short bars. And he said, this is a slide that compares salt intake to all-cause cardiovascular mortality, and morbidity, big cardiovascular events, meaning heart attacks, clogged arteries, all sorts of stuff that kill you. So he says, this one tall bar on the right, and so everything else is off to the left. He says, which do you think is the high salt intake side? Well, turns out the low salt intake side was the big bar of death. So we don't get hypertension, high blood pressure because of high salt. We get it because of low salt. And I've got to say, as soon as he said that, I'm sitting in the back of the room going, oh my God, I heard this in 1980 when I was an intern in medicine at Bethesda Naval Hospital. I went to an international meeting on blood pressure. I thought I was going to be a cardiologist, but fortunately I gave that idea up, went into orthopedic surgery, but that's a joke to you cardiologists. But in any case, I went to this meeting on hypertension. Hypertension wasn't the big problem back in 1980 that it has become. Something has changed. I'm not saying it wasn't a problem, but it wasn't like we see now. Everybody on pills, and almost everybody is taking blood pressure pills. Well, I went to this international meeting, big guys from all over the world, and they said that the conclusion of the meeting, that this was their conclusion. We don't exactly know what's causing the high blood pressure. We don't exactly know what level we should treat the blood pressure. We're not convinced of the optimum treatment yet. What we all agree upon, though, is that salt doesn't matter. That was what they said in 1980. But immediately after that, I kept seeing people in this new thing of this low salt diet, and it really came out in force. One of the things I really hated about COVID the worst is all the salt shakers disappeared from the restaurants. You notice that? And most of them never come back. So I carry my own grinder of salt now because I just can't wait for the server to find you that one salt shaker in the back of the kitchen. By then you've eaten your meal and it's tasteless. So what's this war on salt about? Well, I think Brownstein nailed it. So in my conspiratorial mind, I'm also sitting back in this listening to him, and I realize, oh, wait a minute. How about this whole push for free water, that you should be drinking 8.5 cups of water a day? It's all over the internet. When my friends told me about it, I said, "Are you kidding me? There's no you drink when you're thirsty, and if you're losing, a lot of fluids, you're out. But just don't make it a habit of always drinking water that's excess water." But then I'm sitting in the back and I'm saying, "Okay, let me get this right. We're eating too little salt, so it's producing high blood pressure. How would you make that worse? Oh, a lot of free water that flushes what left you have of your salt out." And here's the way it works for you doctors out there that haven't thought this out, because I wasn't in medicine. I wasn't following this. This is such basic physiology 101. The pharmaceutical companies have to know this. This is how they've gotten all doctors to prescribe hypertension drugs and not know what's causing it, because they created it and they're selling a drug, and you're going along with it. So here's the deal. If you take too much salt, we pee the salt out. Now, subsequently to his lecture, I've been looking at the scientific literature on this, and they know how this works. I mean, but they're purposely doing studies wrong to make no correlation between salt intake and health. They make it so that it makes hypertension, and the real way to check salt intake is by urinary excretion. That's been shown and proven in non-medical circles, so that they don't have a dog in the fight. But anyway, you take a lot of salt, you can pee it out. But if you don't take enough salt, what happens? Your fluid in your sodium is what keeps the blood volume up. If you don't have enough sodium, your blood volume starts to contract. So your body senses this very precisely and takes fluid out of your cells. Takes salt out of your cells, so it keeps the fluid in the blood. But in the process, now you don't have enough salt in your cells, and they aren't not looking good. And then when you do take in water, it distributes wrong, and you get cankles, you get the swollen ankles, and all that kind of stuff. If you take enough salt, that won't happen. So it's low salt. But then if you get to the end game on low salt, your body still can't keep the blood pressure up. It turns on a system called the angiotensin system. Angio meaning artery, and tensin meaning tension. So the squeezing artery system. And it bashes you very imprecisely to keep your blood pressure up. It's meant to be used only in emergencies, and you're using it all the time on these low salt diets. And guess what? Your blood pressure overshoots. You still don't have the right makeup of your bloodstream, but now you're overshooting your blood pressure. No problem. We give you now blood pressure pill.
But I always say this, like, why when you go to the hospital do they hook you up to a saline?
I know. I had not thought of that.
People started saying
that recently.
Does anybody ever think that is the first thing they do? So if salt is bad, why are they pumping salt into you? And people who are brilliant and smart never make the connection.
Well, I never connected it. I never thought about it in those terms. I just thought it was, okay, you need fluid. And just in case you need fluid, we're going to put this in. Now, they may not be giving you a bunch of fluid, right? To be fair. I mean, this is like, if you've been in an accident, we don't know if you're going to drop your blood pressure. So we put the IV in just in case, but we're not flooding you with it. So I still see that point. The point is, though, if salt were so desperately bad, why
would they do it? Right, exactly. And
you can't put just water in your veins. That's the point. But the point is, if you take too much salt, you pee it out. And so he has gotten people off their blood pressure medicine by giving them 2 teaspoons of sea salt. Don't use that processed, just sodium chloride. You get the good blended tea salt, like Celtic salt. I like Baja Gold, is really tasty.
What about Mondin?
Don't you put borax in it or something?
Yeah, now see, I've got my own little concoction. Yeah, but you work yourself up to 2 teaspoons a day. Now, what you'll find is that's pretty salty, even in a big mug. So what I started doing was making, like in the winter, I started doing a mug, because this was October when I heard him talk. So I started making a mug of salt tea, right? First, I just used salt, but then I started saying, well, maybe I'll do half salt, half baking soda. I'm still getting the sodium, and I'm helping my pH. Okay, so I started doing that. And then I put in about 1/8 of a teaspoon to 1/4 teaspoon of borax. Turns out borax has a lot of medicinal properties, and they've known that for a long time. The naturopaths, the old homeopaths, everybody that was really watching the world, they knew that borax really made things better, and they not necessarily knowing why. So I use it for cleaning, and I just decided I'm just going to, and I will just say this is totally without proof, but we heard through the grapevine in COVID, there were some scientists talking that somebody went to a meeting. They overheard these guys saying, yeah, we think maybe maybe borax breaks up the nanotechnology.
Well,
So,
we've all
don't
put
know,
it in
but-
our baths, right? Like,
Right.
you put baking soda and
Yep.
the
Borax,
salt.
baking soda, and salt,
Yeah.
or magnesium. Magnesium.
Feel amazing. I mean, at least
Yeah.
I do. I don't know if it's the real.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so I think salt, I mean, that's just an awesome way to do it. But another thing that borax does is it makes it not taste as salty. For some reason, once you do that, you can take in more salt in your water. He says he walks around with, like the Starbucks bottle with the lids on it. He walks around with those all the day, not the metal. You want to have a plastic or something, glass. But he walks around those all the day with like salt water, like seawater tasting stuff that he drinks. So yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. So I try and do it every day. And I think you don't, until you do this yourself, you don't realize how much you've been struggling in certain little aspects of your life.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about, you did mention the mineral starter pack, but maybe just talk a little bit about your store and, what you put together and offer and all that good stuff.
Sure. Well, I'm at themedicalrebel.com. And if you want to read about a lot of these things, again, my point is to get people to think differently. And once you do, then you'll realize you have to start with the first thing is don't poison yourself, when you start about your health. So that you have to do that on your own, and then, good diet and things, but then you have to mineralize yourself. And so I've got things in my shop that I have put there. And but it's the people that do the foundation pack. They have their full complement of stuff. I'm just now adding, for example, a special iodine that's a liquid for people that like the liquid. But I have the two things that I really use are the foundation pack with the it's the calcium and magnesium that's highly bioavailable. Like you said, these powders that are micronized, it's highly bioavailable. In fact, my friend Dave Janda, he's an orthopedic surgeon he's a knee surgeon, and he had back pain. I'm a spine surgeon. I had knee pain. Neither of us could solve it until we started taking that, and now we don't have the problem. I think that's kind of funny. But yeah, so it really does work. So that's, you mineralize yourself, you clean up your diet, don't poison yourself with drugs and vaccines. I love, and there's vitamin. I'm just now putting sublingual B12 with folate, with methylated folate in there. If people that have MTHFR, but I never even heard that term until not too long ago. So
that's BP McGuire.
Right. I think that's
digging into that.
Yeah, when the problem is I don't know how they know it's that versus it's, I think I have it too, if that's the case. But as you get older, you don't absorb the vitamin B from your gut, vitamin B12. You can get the other B vitamins, but there's a special intrinsic factor in your gut. When it goes away or gets damaged because of a bad diet over your life, you start losing the ability to take vitamin B12. And I've had people, because I'm a spine surgeon, I did all sorts of neurologic exams. I'm telling you, I had people that had what they called diabetic neuropathy or polyneuropathy of unknown etiology, and they'd had it for years. And because they tested normal on B12, nobody ever tried it on them. So I give them B12 with methylated folate that was sublingual under the tongue, and they get better. So I mean, you can't.
Well, that's another myth, right? Because my fiance is a pharmacist that doesn't really believe in anything, but he's been doing it for 100 years. So, and I educate him all the time on a lot of different things. And that's another thing, the folate versus folic acid.
Yeah.
I mean, it just goes on and on and on.
Right. They can't be this dumb. If they can go the wrong way, they will. It's over and over. So it's not a mistake. This is a war against us. And again, it's like I'm leaving tomorrow for Red Pill to talk at Red Pill. And I'm actually going to talk about the scam of smallpox, how they convinced you about what smallpox is and why you had to take a vaccine. Turns out, and I think this is my own original research. I went through hundreds of years of data on smallpox. It's coming out in my book too. But I gave a talk years ago. It's time to name the enemy. All roads lead to Phrygia. And I'm telling you, all the stuff that we're dealing with comes out of this place that nobody's ever heard of. Probably from the ancient Babylonians. They got the law from them, and there was a migration or something. But where the Babylonian system from, and that could have come from Sumer, but where that system got birthed into the world was a place called Phrygia. And we live with those symbols all over medicine, all over our state capital, all over every place. And so these people were they were thousands of years, if you believe Herodotus. I'm reading historians now, not so much medicine. Thousands of years before the pharaohs. So we all learn things in school that don't matter. Yeah. How many people studied Tutankhamun, and how many people think he has any implication in today's world? Everybody studies it, but he has nothing that we know. Well, if they studied the history of Phrygia, they'd say, why do my coins have that symbol on it? Why is it in the federal capital, the symbol? Wait a minute. Why is it called coronavirus? You'd learn all this stuff. You'd question it, but we never studied it. That's how they do the magic.
They never taught it because they controlled, the education department. I mean, so there's so much like negativity. However, there's a lot of alternatives that you can incorporate, like you said, mineralizing yourself, the vitamin D, the vitamin C, good quality brands. Your store is one they can go to. Now you're coming out with a new product that is sublingual. You said I think you said the iodine and the folate. So there's
B12 and folate, yeah.
B12, sorry. But what do you think?
Right, I think we're going to come into a great new medical world here soon.
That's what I wanted to hear.
I think this is about, it's like I say, it's not about switching your pill cabinet around. It's about thinking differently. And so don't think of it as you have to have this precise diagnosis, this precise treatment. You have to go to a medical doctor. You can't function on your own without somebody in a white coat telling you what to do. And I was one. It's going to be a little uncomfortable at first because you're going to have to use your own judgment sometimes. There are times we're still going to have hospitals. I do think we're going to have, but they're going to be trauma hospitals, emergent hospitals. They're not going to be for everyday stuff like they're being used for now. I think that the day of the big hospital where people are just treated terribly and they're laying around and being fed horrible food, I think that's over. I think we're going to find, because people are upset about what happened at COVID. It was a big eye opener how many people died unnecessarily in the hospitals and how badly they were treated if they didn't go along with the program. Yeah. So that has changed enough people. You only need a few % of the people to change the reality. And so I think that's changed it. But the first thing you have to realize is you're not dependent on the doctor, that people were healthy and well before hospitals and before doctors. We have the ability, people think we lived longer than our ancestors. Cro-Magnon man was almost 7 feet tall with good bones and good teeth. Then as you go through history, you come to the people that were like the Mamluks that were eating a diet that they want to push on us now of low, like not too much meat, all kind of fruits and vegetables and kind of, green stuff. And they were scrawny people with bad bones and bad teeth. We have the archaeologic record. The Native Americans, their height went down over like 30 years after they were in captivity on the reservations. They went from being the tallest native people, they were 6'2", 6'3", the chiefs, down to short, scrawny people from their diet. They weren't changing their genetics. They were going down because of their diet. So now we know. Now we have an opportunity, and we realize that we can come out of this. But you can't run to the doctor for every sniffle, and you're going to have to realize what I've done, and this is the value at least of a scientific education, is I've really dug down into what's the evidence for this, which is hard. Not everybody can do that, but you can start using some common sense. My friend Brian Artis, who's a chiropractor but should be teaching the medical doctors how to be medical doctors, I'm going to tell you, I had him on the show the other night, and he was saying that for 20 years when he was in practice, people would come in with all these symptoms, and he would then have them write down all the symptoms in order of the priority. And then he would have them write down the medicines that they're on. And then while he was doing his exam or whatever, he would give that list of medicines to his staff, and they had a computer way of just finding out all the different side effects of these medicines, and they'd put it in a list, and he'd compare the two, and here they were the same. Okay, so there's my mother-in-law, my husband's mom. She had a lot of things going on with her. She was falling. She'd had this kind of quavery voice and everything. And she was 80, but she finally said, I just stopped. One day I heard her calling him, and she sounded great. I said, you sound great. What's going on? She said, I stopped all my medicines.
Yeah.
So you got to look in your life first and see where you're being poisoned. And I'm going to tell you, medicines are a big one.
Yeah.
Medicines are a big one. And vaccines are the biggest of the big.
Yeah.
They wanted to get something under our skin for reasons I'm not sure why, but don't let them anymore. Don't take any of these. There's no evidence that any of them have actually made you better. Before, people do not realize that before vaccines, and this is why I'm trying to get these messages out, before the age of vaccination and Edward Jenner, which that whole is a fairy tale that's not true about Jenner, we didn't have cancer, tuberculosis, all these bad things, heart attacks, and people actually were fairly long lived when they weren't, but we had a bad perinatal mortality. In other words, a lot of women died in childbirth with the child, and that makes it look statistically like they didn't live very long. But if you survived that, and you survived, getting into your teenage years and past, your tendency, that's what we should be looking at, is if you want to really compare apples to apples, look in the 1840s at what your life expectancy was if you made it to 50. Look at all of our founding fathers, how they all got gray hair. It seemed like if they didn't die in the Revolutionary War, they lived into their 80s and 90s, like Ben Franklin. Yeah. So we're not paying attention. We're being sold a bill of goods. Go back and look at the evidence for yourself. Look at where you're getting poisoned, mineralize yourself, and then and exercise, and then go from there. Clean up your diet. It's not that hard. And this is what Hippocrates actually said, whose great uncle was a poisoner. He came from a family of poisoners. And it's unbelievable. His great uncle was a famous poisoner. And so, but he wrote not to poison people.
Wow.
So,
whistleblower, we might call him today, right? He came from a cabal family and blew the whistle.
He was the dissenter in the.
Yeah.
Now, I know we've got a lot of faith in Bobby Kennedy turning a lot of things around in the medical industry, and this massive leap we're going to make, this talk about these 6,000 patents that have been hidden from us that are going to get released. And I already know Elisa and I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, and I've got so many questions on there. We've still got about 30 minutes, so I've got to go on another show. Otherwise, we could just go on and on and on. But I'd really like to hear you talk about parasites and cleansing and the causation of cancer and stuff, and ivermectin and all those sorts of things.
Well, sure. There's a perfect example of what we knew when that was covered up. So I'll tell you what we knew before 1930. We knew that cancer was a parasite. That was the predominant academic belief in 1900, was that there were three theories of cancer, that it was from irritation, called the Virchow's irritation theory, that it was what was the other one? That it was, it was their version. They didn't call it genetic because they didn't use that term back then, but they said it was basically that you were born with cancer cells in you, these germ cells that would then become cancer later in life, or that the third one was that it was parasites. And the predominant theory was parasites. There was a guy who went over to England, and well, he was in England. He lived in London. I think he's a physician. He was a surgeon, and he kept hearing about these cancer sick houses, these cancer plague houses. So he started investigating them. And I remember one of them, it was like a rooming house back then, just in the 1880s. It was a rooming house, and there were multiple rooms, and there was one room where 4 people had all come down with cancer. And 3 of them were dead, and 1 of them was dying. But all lived in this exact same room. The one guy, somebody would die, and the next person would move in, and then they'd get cancer and die, and the next person would move in, but not in the rest of the house. And he noticed at the time that room was particularly humid and moist. Okay, the rest of the house was not. We also had a doctor who went over this. Actually, he was not a physician; he was a research guy. But he went over to Germany to a town called Luckau, which had 5,000 people roughly at the time. But they had a horrendous death rate from cancer. More than, I mean, our death rate is nowhere near this. It was like 4% or something was from cancer in this little town. But he found that the town was in two parts. One was a high dry part and one was a low swampy part. And 100%, all the death was in the low swampy part. I can tell you that I got interested in this because during COVID, after the shot, not after the disease, but after the vaccine, I got called by a bunch of military docs that they were seeing these horrendous cancers in these young active duty people. They'd present with stage 3 and stage 4. Looking back on it, it's tragic, but why would that be happening? And specifically, I didn't hear that so much I didn't get calls from Air Force doctors. I got calls from the guys at the Marine Corps, like at Camp Lejeune, where they're out in the swamp. And I got calls from Fort Bragg, where, again, these are the people that are out in the wet, boggy areas. So there's clearly an environmental component that we've never been told. Secondly, is there were some Japanese doctors that discovered, and this is the parasite theory I said earlier about the pathologist. People had seen what they thought were parasites in cancer cells. So there was some Japanese researchers just before World War II, Kosai and Kobayashi, and these guys were looking. Now, Japanese in cancer, gon and stomach cancer is a big deal in Japan, and so maybe that's what they were looking at. That's the nice assumption. But they were looking at these animals in the wild and what they had in their stomach and what happened to them. And they discovered that if they were foragers, like monkeys, dogs, cats, monkeys was the worst one. They opened up their stomachs. They had these spirochetal parasites. But if the animal was healthy, nothing seemed to bother them. I mean, it didn't seem to decrease their life expectancy. They just had them. So they started studying these. Well, they decided, but if you were a squirrel and just ate nuts, this didn't apply to you. I mean, it was foragers. Again, the Marine Corps over in Africa someplace, that's the kind of thing we're seeing. So these Japanese guys took this into the lab and they got these rabbits and they started feeding them this spirochetal parasite. But nothing happened. They'd see the parasite, they'd scope the stomach and they could see the parasite was there. It would come and go, but it didn't seem to bother the rabbit. Unless then they did a study where they gave the parasite to the rabbits and then they vaccinated them for rabies with a crude vaccine. It was called Virus Fix back then. Crude vaccine. And then the parasite blew up in the stomach, took the rabbit down, and it made these characteristic lesions that looked like stomach cancer in their stomach. What's going on here? Okay. So, and the interesting date is 1919 when they published this. I found this in an old journal of parasitology. Shiro Ishii, who was a famous bioweaponeer in World War II, about that time was going around the world in 1920, and he was going around and making a world tour of labs overseas and was looking at bioweapons stuff. And he came back and said, we need to get our bioweapons program going. Of course, he came here as well to the Rockefeller Institute and various different places. So anyway, but so that here we have an example of that. Well, in 1927, a guy named Johannes Fibiger was given a Nobel Prize for discovering about how this worked. He took rats and he had you had rat catchers in those days to go get you the specimens, and they were bringing in these groups of rats, and he had a different parasite. He'd been probably reading this literature that was coming out, and he noticed when he was looking in stomachs of some other animal that he saw these same characteristic lesions, and he said, they do look like parasite egg sacs. We're not talking about, by the way, the point is not to say that parasites cause your body to make cancer cells. The point is that parasites are the cancer cells, that they get into the cells, they cause the metabolic derangement that Otto Warburg saw in the 1920s, and they cause the lumps that we see as masses are parasite egg sacs. That is the point. So what happened is he's doing this, and he finds that there are nematode worms in these cancers that he's seeing. Well, nematode worms are what we have in America. That's what they created the Rockefeller Institute for, was for hookworm. We're taught in medical school, don't worry about parasites. That's a third world country problem. They knew it. It's not true. It's not true where anybody lives. It's not a third world country problem. See, this is the first part of the cover up. So Fibiger is now in Copenhagen, and he's looking at rats and he's dosing them with this particular nematode worm parasite. And lo and behold, some groups of his rats all get stomach cancer, and other groups, none of them do. And he's trying to figure out, what? How can this be? So he calls in the rat catchers and he says, what's the difference between these groups of rats? And the rat catchers say, oh, doc, those ones that got the cancer, we caught those in a sugar factory. So what did we know before 1930? And by the way, there was a very famous guy in Buffalo, New York. He was a surgeon, but he gave a talk, Harvey Gaylord. It was published in an AMA journal in 1909. And he said, you know, we have to quit debating whether parasites cause cancer. We all know they cause cancer. The only question is it all cancers or some cancers? So this is what we knew before. By 1909, they were convinced in academic medicine parasites was an infectious cancerous disease. The guy from the future dean of McGill University wrote articles on this. This was big time. And yet suddenly it went quiet. And this is my idea that this has been purposely weaponized. So in 1927, Fibiger got the Nobel Prize for doing this. But if you look up his research, they say on the Nobel site, they say, oh yeah, we gave Fibiger the Nobel Prize, but it's been later considered to be a misjudgment of the committee because that's not true. It's actually a dietary problem that caused those rats to have the cancer. So I looked up the paper that they cite as the evidence against Fibiger. You can't find it. Now, we know that they're hiding science behind paywalls and doing all these things, but this one is different. It looks to me like this paper has been made up. You can't find anything about it. It doesn't have index anywhere. Usually you can index them, find them, but you can't read them. This one you can't find. So, and there's tons of evidence to support Fibiger. Shouldn't be just about one paper. So that's what's going on here. And I think, and so they've been using, here's the other thing is we spent $8.2 billion in cancer research in America. And that's just what we know about. Okay. We don't know. So when why would the Army get involved in cancer? Because then it goes into the black programs and we don't have to know. So I was just going to read you a quote. This is from the, oops, I got a cat here on my, this is about bioweapons. Okay. And it says a gun or a bomb leaves no, this is from a 1948 Defense Intelligence Report. A gun or a bomb leaves no doubt that a deliberate attack has occurred. But if an epidemic slashes across a crowded city, there's no way of knowing whether anyone attacked, much less who. And then later, in 1952, another report said the results of some biowarfare agents resemble natural outbreaks of disease, and it would be difficult to connect clandestine employment of such agents with a hostile act. So I'm going to tell you, my belief is that cancer is a clandestine biowarfare agent, and they've weaponized parasites. They know how it works. Think about what they're doing. We knew that it was high carb diets and vaccines caused the parasites to blow up in you. Okay, what are we seeing in your country and mine? We're surrounded by donut shops and candies, and everything's got sugar added. We're on a high carb diet. They've only just now, Bobby Kennedy and those guys have just now changed. They're changing, they've flipped the pyramid. But the pyramid for years, all my time in medicine, had all the starchy carbohydrate breads on the bottom and the meat and oil on the top. It should be the other way around. We've been given vaccination starting in the pandemic of 1918, which wasn't, and that goes forward to today where they're vaccinating. Like my husband, when he was in the Navy, I got some vaccines, but not like this. When he was on a ship, they got vaccinated every year for the H1N1 flu that went around, and they stopped it in 1 year in civilian life, but they vaccinated them four years in a row or something like that. He got the vaccine. What? See, none of this makes sense even from basic medical thinking. If you've already determined you don't need it out there, and then people say, oh, it takes a while in the government to get things changing. No, this is a purposeful thing. Yeah. Yeah. So, and I think it explains everything we're seeing. Genetics, they always want to make it that cancer's genetics. But if that were true, why don't we all, if we have the BRCA gene for breast cancer, why don't we all get it? We don't. And in fact, a lot of people get breast cancer that don't have that gene. Right. So, but we spent $8.2 billion on treatment in up front. And this is what John Baylor said. He was the former statistician of the National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute, rather. And this Dr. John Baylor. And this is what he said. They now count things that are not cancer. And because we are able to diagnose at an earlier stage of the disease, patients falsely appear to live longer. Our whole cancer research in the past 20 years has been a total failure. More people over 30 are dying from cancer than ever before. He was the editor of the National Cancer Institute's journal. I mean, this guy's not a lightweight, okay? So the bottom line on getting out of the mess that we're in, both with cancer and with everything else, is to realize that we really are in a false medical reality. That's why I'm talking about this. You know, we had a bioweapons program in World War II, and what happened to it after World War II? Well, the Fort Detrick buildings were the day that, or the same year that Nixon stopped our offensive bioweapons program. What did he do? He asked the Army to please move all the buildings of Fort Detrick under the NIH for the National Cancer Institute. So the bioweapons labs went under the National Cancer Institute. Let that one sink in. And of course, it's not just a building, it's a building filled with people doing research. So that all went under the National Cancer Institute. And it's interesting, when I was in medical school, I had a book on pharmacology, and it was Goodman and Gilman. Well, it turns out that after World War I, all that mustard gas in World War I, in World War II, we started making all this mustard gas again, but we never used it. We had, I can't remember how many tons, 80 tons of mustard gas, just of this type of gas, just in Huntsville, Alabama. What did they call it? The armory or something. So they kept manufacturing it. So what were they doing with it? Well, it turns out that there was a guy named Milton Winternitz. He was the dean of Yale Medical School, and he got a government contract to see if chemical warfare agents could do something for cancer. And so suddenly we got bioweaponeers now getting a free pass to investigate on people with their bioweapons and call it cancer research. And the guys' names that did it at Yale with him, Goodman and Gilman, the people that wrote my book of pharmacology in medical school. You just cannot make this stuff up.
And then hence we have chemotherapy. Yeah,
and chemotherapy came out of that. Now, in World War II, we always think that, oh, we were the good guys and the Germans were the bad guys, and never the twain shall meet. But trust me, it's all blended together. In Nuremberg, Dr. Kurt Blom, he was provably the chief of bioweapons for the Wehrmacht and the SS. So we know he was a bioweaponeer. But where was he stationed? At the German Cancer Research Institute. That was the camouflage for their bioweapons program. And where did he go after the war? Well, this was a guy that said that he equated medical and military power in their power for life and death. Think about that. So war and medicine, we'll put them together. We can kill people or not kill people. But he, after the war, he was interviewed by the guys from Fort Detrick, our bioweaponeers. And he was hired by Sidney Gottlieb to go work on the MK Ultra program. But where was it being done? It was in Western Occupation Zone in a cancer institute. Yeah, I mean, it just goes on and on. It's all. So I think cancer research. This is my point. I believe cancer research is a front for continued bioweapons programs, not just to be used in war that we think of as conventional war, but to be used against their own people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, we see so many of these charity events, many people dressing up in pink, going on these fun runs and stuff, all raising money for these cancer charities. And they're probably funding their own demise.
Right. Like my 8-year-old once said, Mom, how does it help cancer to walk in circles? He's talking about getting those people to walk around the football track to raise money for cancer. I mean, it's tragic. And really,
it is tragic.
Because... And let me just say, if you get your vitamin D level up over, I think it was over 60, your chance of getting cancer, in spite of these psychopaths, goes down by 80%. Now, so we have the treatments. We now have a program. We can take care of ourselves with this. Do not fall into this false narrative. Do not go down that path. Do not get poisoned. I can tell you people that have successfully treated their cancer with fenbendazole, and ivermectin and things like that. But then they just can't not, they were getting better. A friend of mine, he was getting better for a couple months. He was going to go down to MD Anderson, but couldn't get in for 2 months. His wife found this stuff about the fenbendazole online, started doing it. He coughed up some stuff that was kind of black and was better after that. I mean, he was getting better. But then, because our minds are set that, hey, we got to do this, he goes down to MD Anderson And of course, we didn't know as much as we know now. It wasn't in the public back when he did it. So he felt he had to go. And he got the chemotherapy and radiation, and it just dwindled him down. It took him years to get back from that. Whereas if he just couldn't, if he'd had a flat tire, he might have been doing better. And that's not, I'm not screaming about MD Anderson per se. One of my friends was one of the founders, but I don't think he's dead now. But it's just that they were taught, because there's a program being run against us and against humanity.
Yeah. And, whenever the big thing, with the pink and the breast cancer, right? I always say, okay, well, again, I'm not a doctor. And I'm like, why don't you just stop using deodorant that has aluminum? Like, that would be,
Oh yeah, that'd be a simple thing. And that's what I say.
Thing, right? But
go through your list of poisons and figure out where to stop them.
When they talk about finding a cure, I'm like, why don't we realize our lives we could prevent, rather than try to, kill all these animals and all these other stupid things they do to try to, keep getting their funding so they could say that they're doing cancer research. And I was just in Florida recently, and I heard the most disturbing story ever about a friend of a friend whose wife had the breast cancer gene. Didn't have breast cancer.
Right, that's the BRCA.
Went and had a double mastectomy.
I know. Because
you can't make. I literally almost had a breakdown in front of this person. I'm like, what? And now, wait, this was even better. It's being told to me like she was very proactive, and now she's thinking of going to get a hysterectomy because of some other BS with cervical cancer. And I literally felt like I was in the Twilight Zone. Like, how do you respond to this?
It's a mass human sacrifice. I'm going to tell you,
100%.
Mutilation of our children and of our adults for all sorts of reasons. We're murdering people medically. It's a big human sacrifice.
It's horrific, isn't it? I even had some notes here. There's a man, I can't remember his first name. You were talking about that interview. His name was someone Douglas, and he owned a radium mine or something like that. And
That's
sold that to a man called Ewing, and that's where radiotherapy came from. Do you want to just talk about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, so this guy Douglas owned James Douglas. He was a mining engineer, but he donated a bunch of money. It's no old time money, so I can't remember how it compares to today, but it was like the Bill Gates type millions and billions of dollars that are given to charity for different things. And he donated it to James Ewing. I think his first name was James, but Dr. Ewing we knew him as in orthopedics. We knew about Ewing sarcoma. So it's a bone cancer in children. And, he was the guy that described it. So he actually might not have been, he actually did some things that were fairly reasonable, but to push him, but he got given all this. They put out these guys, they make these things happen. You just, trust me, stuff like this would never happen to people like me, because we're not one of the chosen. You have to be one of the chosen. So Ewing is one of the chosen, and he's from a prominent East Coast family. He gets put in and he's the first dean of the medical school, I think at Columbia or someplace. And then it becomes the next step is they build this cancer research thing from this money from Ewing. I mean, from the money from James Douglas. And yes, he was a mining engineer. So he gave Ewing, what was it? Radium. He gave Ewing radium. In fact, he gave him like almost 4 grams of radium. I think it was 3.75 grams or something like that. But he gave him this radium, which made this cancer doctor, who wasn't a cancer doctor really yet, but became one. This guy, Ewing, that was just he was the first dean of a small medical school at that time. He was now the largest owner of refined radium in the world. So, I mean, the fix is in. So they made it so that's how they set it up. And Ewing went on to become the grand old man of, pathology and cancer research and stuff like that. And he was on Time magazine, and he was given the Gold Cane Award for outstanding lifetime stuff in pathology. It's the American Association of Pathologists. And where did I find this? Let me see. I can't remember. I can't read the date, but it was in the Apollo magazine. I can't make it up. Everywhere you turn.
Can't make it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
No, I mean, you can't turn over a rock without finding evil and a system being run. And it goes way back. In fact, I'll tell you, have you ever seen the movie? There's a TV show, actually. It's called The Three-Body Problem.
No.
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
Okay, well, it's what the premise is I think very predictive programming. I think they're telling us. So the premise of the show, I mean, three-body problem refers to a physics problem in astronomy, I think. But the basically there's a planet that's dying, and these aliens have to get off of it. So they get into their ship, and they find the planet Earth. They think that's a good place, bunch of primitive natives that they can easily take over. So they jump in their ships and they're headed towards Earth. But they have ability to communicate and visualize things. I mean, they can get data back and forth, apparently scalar, like instantaneously, but they can't travel faster than a certain speed. So they're lagging behind. It's going to take them 400 years or something to get to Earth. Well, during that time, Earth is progressing until they get to the point where now they're getting closer and they realize they can actually communicate to people on Earth, but they realize that we've advanced so much that they won't be able to take over our planet. So they have to stop our rate of advancement. And how do they do it? They send messages ahead that jigs the physics. They convince physicists that they're dangerous to that they're actually doing the right thing and progressing us. They send them messages to kill themselves and things that get programmed into their brain. They do all these things. So in other words, they're sending, if you change, and this is what I've learned, if you change science way back, if your founding principles of some science are wrong, then as it moves forward, it's terribly wrong. And that's where we are today. They jigged things back in the 1800s. They created this whole virus idea. They created cancer. They created a bunch of things that because it's been so many years going on, we just can't believe it's all scripted and it's not real. So we believe it. But we also, the researchers, I said, I asked a friend of mine, it's a big lab tech, and I said, how does this explain PhD students? How they're not being paid? They can't bribe them. How are you going to deal with that? Well, the answer is they don't really know the implication of their research. They're given a project. They just want to get their PhD. And so they don't necessarily go back and look at the very beginning of the science. If you did, you'd find out these things. You know, like here's one. Here's one. Where are the guys on Harvard on this one? Smallpox. What's the story? Edward Jenner discovered that cows were getting a disease called cowpox. He thought that they were having this stuff on their udders that were going to the milkmaids, and the milkmaids were spared cowpox. Smallpox. I'll give everybody that's at risk of smallpox, I'll give them a little dose of this cowpox, and we'll see if it keeps them from getting smallpox. And that's the story we're told. Now, millions and millions and millions of people have gotten smallpox vaccines, and initially it was a 1% mortality. So there's a lot of people that Edward Jenner resulted in death. He didn't save the world, as they want you to tell. But here's the kicker. There is no such thing as cowpox. Now, where were the big university guys? If you look at it, baby heifers don't get it. Steer don't get it. Bull don't get it. The only cows that get cowpox are those being milked by the dirty hands of the milkmaids. In other words, it was going the other way.
Right.
So I said, I wonder if the veterinarians know this. And yes, they do. If you go to veterinarian texts and you look up cowpox, what they say is, oh, no, it's pseudo-cow. We now know it's pseudo-cowpox, meaning fake cowpox, meaning it's not what they said back then. It's not some virus. It's from the contamination of whatever you're milking the cow with, and that's what they treat. And they have to do this because they don't want to get completely defunded. They say, there may be some cowpox, but like we've never seen it. We don't know about it. That's essentially what they're saying. Now, isn't that is so basic?
Yeah. It's all basic if people were not brainwashed to not think.
That's right.
And
I mean masks.
Critical thinking. How
many people, the whole world seemed to mask up. How many people would think it couldn't be right, that there was no science behind it?
Right.
How could...
Well, that's,
I still see these knuckleheads walking around. I'm like, what are they doing?
I know. I want to go up to one and say, what are you protecting yourself from? What should I be worried about?
To be honest, Dr. Lee. So we actually, unfortunately, because we would love to have you on again. Stu has another show coming up at 1. This has been a pure delight. And I just want to give one more for people to be able to go to visit your site once again. It's themedicalrebel.com, and there
Right.
they can find a lot of your what we just spoke about, especially the mineralization and some of these. Is your iodine product on there yet?
It's not quite. It should be in a few weeks. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And that's the one that's combined with the
Right. And there's the foundation pack. I like the one with the blue top. I like this one on the right there. I think that tastes the best. And
right side. Okay.
yeah. So.
All right.
And I've got if anybody's in the Midwest or in America, I am having a meeting I'm running on the Escaping the Medical Matrix conference on August 21st and 22nd. You can find that on the site too.
Where is it?
In Omaha, Nebraska.
Omaha. Okay.
The old
Yeah.
market. It's going to be really nice.
Is any of that going to be streamed or anything like
Yes,
that?
and you can buy. That's right. You can buy a thing so you can watch it at your leisure. And I also have my Rumble channel is the Space Medical Space Rebel. So
Yeah,
I'm there too.
That there.
There it is. Yeah,
I've got all those up. And this video you did here, I've just watched that recently, is absolutely amazing, which is why I've got many more questions for you. So
oh, I have to do it again.
hopefully we could I mean, we've been on 2 hours there, and that feels like 17 minutes to me.
Absolutely.
That was
Well, thank
absolutely magical. So we try and get you on again. If you are very good friends with Dr. Ardis, we'd love to have him on our show. He's been such an instrumental listener as well for many of us over the years, and coming from the background of chiropractor and what happened to his father in hospital that really woke him up and stuff. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. Just one other thing as well, one of our followers, Frank, actually gave us a $10 Rumble rant today. Thank you for everything you do. So thank you, Frank, for that. We're not used to anything like that.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
But yeah, thank you, Dr. Lee. That's been
God bless
absolutely
you for
astounding.
all you do and have done for.
Well, thanks for getting the word out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we fight on. And where we go, one we go all.
Right. Right. There we are.
See you soon.
Take care. We'll see you soon. Thank you, everyone. In the
Exciting
chat.
things coming up, I think.
And I'll see you again in about 14 minutes. Right. See ya. Bye.
Have a question for the peanut gallery in the back. So, all I see is complaints about what's being done. What would you have done? How would you have taken down a cabal that has infiltrated every aspect of our lives? I see a lot of people saying they're disappointed. I'm just curious. What would you do differently? You have to think about the magnitude of this plan, how many preliminary meetings there had to have been before even trusting people. And believe me, everybody says they're going to volunteer to do something, but when push comes to shove, a lot of times you can't count on people. So just that, in and of itself, being able to have enough people to follow through with the plan is amazing to me. So my question is, what would you do differently? How would you have done this? Everybody has an issue and wants to complain, but I don't see anybody stepping up with solutions. I don't see anybody saying anything other than complaining. Can we stop with this and just be grateful that there were people courageous enough to stand up and say, it ends with us, and that we are privy to know that that's happening. Think about how many people are asleep right now and don't even know